How's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to Just the Worst AMA podcast, episode number 2, the long-awaited, very much delayed episode number 2. I'm your host, Billy Donnelly, who you can find at joblo.com. This is Infamous, and of course, right here at Just the Worst podcast. And the way this show works is basically you asked us questions, and I'm here on this podcast to provide you with the answers. Now, we did our first show of this format all the way back in September, and then we ran into a bit of a scheduling snafu, I guess, between myself and my co-host Brian McKevitt, and we still just have not been able to make it work, and I've been dying to kind of get back on this show and answer your questions, the ones that you pose to me all the time. So I not that I ditched him, but I told him that he'd have to play catch up a little bit down the line at some point. And right now I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. So look, the way this works is whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through Twitter, whether you want to comment on our SoundCloud.com account. There are ways for you to submit your questions to us. I'll give you some of the handles right now. You can hit us up on Twitter at JTW Podcast, as well as at Infamous Kid. That is mine. You can also hit up Facebook, facebook.com/JustTheWorstPodcast, or myself there, facebook.com/BillyTheKid. You can send a tweet. You can drop a message. You can put it in our threads when we request it. And all you really need to do is pose a question that you want an answer to. Now look, it could be about anything. You want to ask me about anything on your mind? Go right ahead. You want some advice? I'll see what I can do for you. If you want to ask about movies, which tend to be a lot of what we talk about here, then by all means do that. But whatever it is that's on your mind, that you're seeking some sort of wisdom on. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to provide that, but maybe knowledge, or at least a bullshit response for a little while. That's what we do here. So AMA, as we all know, stands for Ask Me Anything. So at any time, you can ask anything, and we'll go through, we'll find the best questions to bring up on the air, and those will be the ones that we talk about on the show. So I got 4 inquiries to discuss here on this particular show. So without further ado, away we go. And the first question comes in from Javier Sanchez, who wants to know, why is February 12th, 2016 so far away? Referring, of course, to the release date of the Deadpool solo movie by 20th Century Fox. I believe that's the only thing that he's asking for. Maybe 2 days before Valentine's Day. Maybe he's got to wait until the last minute. Zoolander 2 comes out that day. Maybe that's it for him. Maybe Zoolander 2 could be the one that's really getting him. That's all I can really think of. That would be on February the 12th. And look, here's the deal, Javier. This is why February the 12th is so far away. Right now we're towards the tail end of January. You still got a few weeks to go, and quite simply, it's just the way time works. That's the way the calendar works. That's the way the rotation of the Earth works, and the revolutions around the sun. That's the way this whole thing, our concept of time, works. I can't really get into anything further about that, because that would me making things up. This is legitimately how time works. But as far as February 12th, 2016 is concerned, and why does it feel so far away? It's because you're thinking about it so much, man. When you're not doing anything, and you're just sitting around, you're just dwelling, and you're just thinking, and you're concentrating, and you're always looking, you're checking the calendar. Maybe you're watching all the Deadpool trailers. Maybe you're watching all the TV spots. Maybe you got bombarded with all the ads that were on over the weekend during playoff football. Maybe that's it. And if that's the case, You don't do it, because all you're doing is you're just slowing it down. You're building up the hype. You're building up the anticipation. You're making yourself overexcited to see this thing. And you still have to wait. You're not going to get it any earlier than February the 12th. I mean, maybe February the 11th, late at night for a late night movie, or those 7 or 8 o'clock showings. But beyond that, there's no real benefit to you focusing on this thing other than to just drag out the time and make yourself feel like this. So, look, stay away from the Deadpool stuff, okay? Just stay away from it. Leave it alone for a little while. And look, you're going to see the movie anyway. I know you're going to see the movie. If you weren't, you wouldn't be asking me about it and referring to Deadpool. So do much like I did with Star Wars, which is kind of just push it all aside. You know, right before I saw Star Wars The Force Awakens, I just pushed it all aside because there was no need for me to have to absorb all of the promotional materials that were being launched at my face in advance of the release. I already knew I was going to get a ticket. I already knew that I was going to see it. And I just sat back, kicked back, and waited for it to happen so that when I sat down to watch the movie, it was everything that not everything that I wanted it to be and more, but I wasn't all just hyped up. So that's the key, man, is you got to create a little bit of distance for yourself. Stay away from this thing for a little while. And as you keep busy with doing any other things, February 12th will be on you. Before you know it, Deadpool will be here. He'll be breaking down the fourth wall for you. And hopefully it's good. Now look, you asked me this question, so I am going to torture you just a little bit, though. Just a tiny, tiny bit. There are people who have seen Deadpool already. I believe there was a very, very just secret type of screening that came about that Ryan Reynolds was at, and there are people who have seen Deadpool. They've tweeted about it. They've started to circulate word about what they thought of it. It's not too in-depth. It's not too detailed. And I know now you're itching to go find out if the movie's going to live up to the hype. And that's why I said it was going to torture you, because you gotta stick to your guns now. You gotta stay away from this thing if you want February 12th to get here quickly. You want time to fly by. So stay away from the tweets, stay away from the responses, stay a little bit away from Deadpool, and before you know it, you'll be sitting in the theater watching it. So there you go. I hope that's a satisfactory answer to your question. Let's move on. Aaron McNatt has an interesting question for me, which is how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? See, I told you, you can ask anything. Now look, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck? Oh, let's see. I mean, look, I don't know what how do you measure wood? I mean, how do we really measure wood to begin with? Do we measure it by the weight? By the amount, like per tree or per log? Are we measuring pallets? Bunches? Bundles? I don't know how you really measure truckloads. How do you measure wood? So really, while this tongue twister has been out there for so long, I don't know that anybody's actually ever given as much consideration as I have in the last 2 minutes to how exactly do we quantify the wood that would hypothetically be chucked if a woodchuck could chuck wood. I'm gonna say by himself. And look, I'm just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks here. I'm gonna say by himself on a good day. I'm gonna go with one of those small bundles that you would get, for the fireplace. There's a few logs in there. They're split. For you to be able to just toss in and start a fire, maybe get a couple of fires out of there. That's how much I think. I mean, how big is a woodchuck? It's like a gopher, right? Like a tiny beaver? It can't be that big. It's like a groundhog. Yeah, maybe I'll revise it. Maybe only like half of one of those bundles. I mean, then again, the bundle is like split. Like somebody does most of the chopping. I mean, they chop it down. This is much more thought-provoking than I thought it was going to be when I initially read the question. There's so many variables to how much wood a woodchuck could chuck. If, a woodchuck could chuck wood. I think we're going to have to put this question under more study. From now on, look, if you want to ask me about woodchucks chucking wood, you're going to have to get real specific as far as what exactly that means. How we measure it. What time of year is it? As we all know, they hibernate. So I believe they hibernate. I mean, sure, right? He goes in. Did that hole in the Puxatawny. Comes out, checks on his shadow. Goes back, takes another long nap. So, if it's the off season, then the answer for a woodchuck chucking wood is clearly zero. But during the busy time, when the woodchucks are all rallying together, got lots of shit to do. Trying to get things done. I'm trying to make quota. I bet you there's a good amount. But I would say one per one woodchuck. I'm going to go back to my initial idea, which is just one of those like fireplace bundles you'd pick up, and you'd be set right there. Just one of those ones, tied in the rope. That's how much wood a woodchuck is responsible for. So, Aaron, I hope, after far greater thought than this question probably deserved or called for, I hope that's a satisfactory answer. Brian McNabb has a question. I wonder if Brian and Aaron are related. Brothers, cousins, dads. Not dads, but maybe dads. Either way, Brian has a question. Wanting to know any 2015 films I enjoyed in theaters, but after thinking about them afterwards, you came to dislike. Brian, I gave this one some thought, and I couldn't really think of any films that I had initially seen and then came back later to have a completely different opinion on. However, there was a film I did see that I did like a great deal, seeing it in theaters, and then through the lens of distance, being able to think about the film for a few days before talking about it or writing about it or podcasting about it, started to see some of the cracks in the armor, started to see some of the weak links in the script, started to see how certain plot points, certain characters, certain behaviors, certain actions started to melt a little bit under the intense heat of scrutiny. And that film would be Star Wars The Force Awakens, which I mentioned a little earlier in the show. The first time I saw Star Wars The Force Awakens, I saw it in a press screening with a number of members of the media early in the afternoon on a Tuesday. So a few days before the film was going to come out and premiere. And like I mentioned to Javier, as far as separating some distance for Deadpool, that's what I had done for Star Wars The Force Awakens. I wanted to not feel like I had seen a lot of the film going in. I wanted to be able to sit there and kind of just let the experience play for what it was. Hopefully let the film capture some magic on the big screen and let that magic just kind of wash over me and let me experience it. And I really enjoyed it. Star Wars The Force Awakens made my top 10 of 2015. I highly recommended it. I find that the film feels like a Star Wars movie in a way that the prequels never did. It just strikes the right tone. And it's fun and it's enjoyable to watch. That was my take on Star Wars The Force Awakens. I came out of that theater. I felt good about it. I said to myself, they're back on the right track. The future is bright for Star Wars coming out of The Force Awakens. And remember, this is on a Tuesday afternoon. The embargo for the film, I believe, was Wednesday night / Thursday morning at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I did manage to get a review together pretty quickly, and while the emphasis was on trying to have no spoilers out there, I tried to do as best as I could to convey my feelings on the film without getting too specific for people who wanted to still go in fresh to the movie on Thursday for the premiere, as well as heading in through the weekend. So while I didn't really have the opportunity to dive too deeply in on some of the details, once I had cut that review and really started to think a lot more about the film and to talk about it with some people who had seen it in secret behind the embargo, there were certain things I started to notice that I didn't know if they were going to hold up over time. I didn't know if they were going to be able to keep providing me with enjoyment upon further viewings, or if they were going to become problematic, if they were going to be elements along the way that I would look at and say, oh, I forgot that this part wasn't that good, or that this character wasn't as interesting, or that this part didn't come together as well. And there were parts that I seemed to have problems with it. Spoiler alert, talking about it, I thought the encounter between Han Solo and Kylo Ren didn't really hit me as hard as I imagined it would have when I kind of saw it coming in the few moments leading up to such a moment. I thought Princess Leia was underutilized. Sort of some of the old cast were just kind of there for fan service on some levels, but they didn't really have the opportunity to do anything. The deja vu aspect of between The Force Awakens as well as Star Wars A New Hope and a little bit of The Empire Strikes Back, that started to get at me a little bit. I wish there was a little bit more freshness. There were a number of things that, upon allowing myself some distance from the film, some of the shine, some of the bloom off The Force Awakens rose started to just fade away a little bit. And I was wondering, I still liked the movie. I still really liked the movie. But it wasn't that strong knee-jerk reaction that I had when I had just freshly seen it and come out and felt the experience. So I went back over the weekend. I still wanted to be able to take my kids. My wife wanted to go. The whole family was going, and we were lining up for Star Wars The Force Awakens. I was really excited about being able to share it with my kids and see how they sort of reacted to a brand new Star Wars for their generation, something that they could grow up with. And in sitting in the theater now, knowing what to expect, not really watching it so much with as critical an eye as the first time, because the film had to be reviewed on my end, but now to kind of just sit back and watch it for enjoyment's sake too, I found that there were still parts of it that I had problems with, but they were easily forgivable because of how well the rest of the film came together, how well I enjoyed the rest of what Star Wars The Force Awakens was offering, how much I was picking up what that film was putting down. And I found that in the experience, in the moment, Star Wars The Force Awakens delivers everything I really wanted to. I mean, the film just connected with me on a grand level, and it was an enjoyable experience. It was a Star Wars movie that I had been waiting for a number of years. And look, if I sat here right now and I started to really dissect it, there are pieces that I'm absolutely positively sure would start to fall apart once again. But in the moment, when you watch that film, it all just kind of fades away and you get lost in what The Force Awakens is doing. So while there wasn't any film that I saw earlier that I enjoyed upon initial viewing and then came to dislike afterwards, I think Star Wars The Force Awakens fits your question almost a little too precisely, in that it was a film that I enjoyed in theaters. After thinking about it, it doesn't necessarily hold water as well, but in going back and watching it, everything's perfectly fine again. So in that respect, and with respect to your question, Star Wars The Force Awakens, I think, would be it. Not to the point of dislike, but I think the detachment allows you to pick apart certain things that you don't when you're in the moment. And for that, I think that's about as satisfactory as an answer as I could ever give to this particular question for you. One more question to answer here on episode number 2 of Just the Worst AMA podcast. This one comes from Brandon Manny House, who wants to know, in my opinion, what are the most underappreciated films since 2010. Now, this is like 5 years worth of movies, which is a lot of movies. It's a lot of movies as far as I'm concerned. So I didn't really go back and look through 5 years of films to try and pluck a number of them out. But what I did do is I managed to recall 3 films 3 films that I really loved that I don't know that a lot of people saw, and that I think people should give them a chance if they have the time and the open-mindedness to go ahead and give them a look. So going back a little bit further in time towards 2010, this one is a film in 2011 that I believe I actually saw in the tail end of 2010, and that is The Gray. That's Joe Carnahan's film about a bunch of oil rig workers, I believe, oil workers, and sort of a wilderness man played by Liam Neeson, stuck out in the middle of nowhere after following a plane crash, trying to find their way to some sort of salvation in order to escape the elements, as well as escape a pack of wolves that are lurking in the woods that are more than willing to take these individuals up on the free meal that they themselves would be if they were to succumb to a wolf pack attack. I just find that The Gray speaks to me on so many levels, sort of dealing with fear and what it really means to be a man in a number of ways. There's a lot of introspection that goes into that film. I understand why people shied away from it, or they may not have liked it. Right around the time, there was a real heavy push from, I believe it was Open Road Films at the time, to really play up the idea that this is a movie about Liam Neeson fighting wolves out in the wilderness. And as a result, people went into the movie expecting something a little bit more action-packed, not necessarily something thought-provoking and existential. But I think if you were to go and look at that film now, and maybe you're one of those people who thought that initially, maybe you're not, maybe you still have never gotten to see The Gray because there were people who were talking to you about it and they were doing it in such a negative light to the way that you were like, I don't know if I want to put the time in for it. But I think if you go into The Gray with the right mentality and the right mindset and understand that it's a movie about something more than Liam Neeson just fighting wolves in the wilderness, you're going to find that there is a lot that The Gray has to say. There's a lot for The Gray to give you to think about. Joe Carnahan made a fantastic film that was sort of Frank Grillo's coming out party in The Gray. And I think The Gray, for me, and that was my number one movie of the year, I think The Gray, for me, is one of the most underappreciated films since 2010. Now, I want to come to this past year. I think there's another underappreciated film, and that would be Joel Edgerton's The Gift. The thriller starring Rebecca Hall as well as Jason Bateman. And The Gift, man, did this film just sneak up and sort of surprise me out of nowhere. And look, I don't know that the film is underappreciated because everyone I know who has seen it absolutely loves the movie. Anyone that you have convinced to see it, or that I have convinced to see it, since I have seen it, has absolutely loved the movie. So there is an appreciation for that movie and what it does. Unfortunately, I think the film is underseen. It was a very small film by STX Entertainment. That's how it was released. It was released just kind of in the middle of the summer. And, it's one of those films that doesn't really have the oomph that's needed to lure a big mainstream audience to it in the summer blockbuster season. As well as the fact that it's a tough movie to sell because the best way to watch The Gift is by not really knowing very much about the film. Even now, I try to tell you very little, as little as possible, in the hopes that somebody who's listening to this podcast right now who has not seen The Gift will go out and see The Gift and join in the fray with all of these people who have loved it since seeing it. I think anything that you were to tell anybody about The Gift would sort of corrupt and warp their mindset going in, which is once again why I try to say very little about this particular film. But it's a psychological thriller, all in the style that I like as far as how it approaches the material. All the characters are large blobs of gray. There's very little black and white. It tells a very intriguing and interesting story that is not tough to follow, but difficult to figure out in a number of ways as far as where it's going. And I mean, The Gift is really good. So while I don't know that it's underappreciated on the level that people who everyone I know who has seen it really likes it, I think it's underseen, and as a result, because of the smaller number of people who have actually laid eyes on The Gift, that is what makes The Gift underappreciated. More people need to see The Gift so it has the proper amount of appreciation. Then I can cross it off my list. I got one more film here I wanted to add to my list as far as most underappreciated films since 2010. And that would be just going back 1 year. Just 1 year. To a very small film. Actually, it wasn't even that small. It was released by Relatively Media. And it's a romantic drama called Beyond the Lights. It stars Nate Parker and Gugu Mbatha-Raw, as well as Minnie Driver and Danny Glover. And I think Machine Gun Kelly's in it, too. But this is a film, this one for me put Gugu Mbatha-Raw on my radar. It is a film that was marketed all wrong. It is a film that gets really deep into what it means to be a celebrity and celebrity culture and the responsibilities the celebrity has to face, and the fact that in many ways their life is not their own, and sort of the struggle to grasp that and understand that while you try to find something for yourself. And I remember Beyond the Lights. It was a film that had sort of been talked about very faintly around the Oscar campaign season, and Relativity just kind of botched the fact that they had this really fantastic film on their hands. And everyone I know who came to see the film talked an incredible amount about how good Beyond the Lights was. And the movie just kind of came and went because a lot of people didn't know what it was when it was first released. It only grossed about 14.5 million while it was at the box office. So once again, just a very quiet opening, just, in and out of the theaters. And then once people started telling everyone through word of mouth about how good Beyond the Lights was, more people started to seek it out, see it, and sort of be flabbergasted at what a hidden gem this movie is. And that's how I came to be exposed to Beyond the Lights. I had heard so many good things about it, and then in scrolling through Netflix to watch something else that wasn't in my queue, I came across Beyond the Lights being a part of Netflix streaming. And it was one of those nights where I asked my wife, hey, do you just want to watch a movie? And I said, hey, I heard this one is pretty good. And we put it on, and we were kind of blown away by it and how fantastic it was. So Beyond the Lights, I think definitely definitely is one of the most underappreciated films. Once again, a film that's just remarkably underseen, and as a result, there's just not enough people who have seen this movie to fully grasp and understand how good Beyond the Lights is. So it right now is currently available on Netflix streaming. So as you hear this and you say to yourself, I didn't see Beyond the Lights, get to Netflix as soon as you possibly can, add it to your queue, bookmark a night off to just sit around and watch, and you will really, really, I think, understand the love that this film gets from people who have seen it. And I think you'll also add it to your list of movies that you just want to tell people about in hopes that they see it. Why? Because it's underseen and, as a result, underappreciated. So, Brandon, I hope those three films satisfy your question. For me, those are three of the more underappreciated films that we've gotten our way since 2010. And with that, that's it for the show. See, you ask questions, provide some answers for you. So let's keep this bad boy going. So make sure you follow us on social media. Follow the official Just the Worst podcast handle on Twitter. That's at JTW Podcast. You can also follow me there at Infamous Kid. And if you want to ask a question, you want to tweet a question at us and have us pull it or take a look at it throughout the week for the next episode, just add a hashtag JTW, hashtag JTWAMA. We'll do a search for it. We'll pull questions and we'll see what we can find. So that's how you want to do it on the Twitter. If you want to do it on Facebook, facebook.com/Just the Worst Podcast. You can go ahead and send questions in there in a private message, or you can hit me up on facebook.com/Billy the Kid. We put threads up all the time asking you for questions. But if you want to also send me a private message with your question, you could do that as well. We'll pick some of the best questions that we get on a weekly basis. We'll bring them up for the show. We'll address them. We'll answer them. And I'll try and make sure that you're satisfied with whatever response, whatever reply, whatever bullshit I may have pulled from my ass for you on this particular show in order to make sure that you got some type of response to whatever it is that you asked me as far as anything goes. So with that said, make sure you follow all of our podcasts. You can do that at SoundCloud.com. SoundCloud.com. You can go ahead and follow and subscribe there, I believe. And all you got to do is do a search for Just the Worst Podcast, and our whole plethora of shows will come up there for you to be able to take a listen to. Pick anyone out that you like from the archives, something new. I'm pretty sure that you'll be entertained, or at least engrossed for however long that we talk when the mics get hot. So SoundCloud.com, that's where you can find all of our podcasts. And on a weekly basis, daily basis, you make sure you find me at JoeBlow.com, as well as This Is Infamous, and right here, of course, at Just the Worst Podcast. It's not going to be another few months before we get another show. We're going to try and fire one up in the next week or two here as we keep the questions going. So, Just the Worst AMA Podcast, episode number 3. That's going to be on the way. Make sure you send your questions in for us to address on the show. And in the meantime, this particular one, Just the Worst AMA Podcast, episode number 2, this one is over. I've been your host, Billy Donnelly. Thanks for your questions. We'll see you next time. Peace. Just the Worst AMA Podcast, episode number 2, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast Media.